Hey y'all, okay, we're gonna go ahead and continue on with Anne Frank. In case you need catching up, things are getting interesting in the annex. Our two families, the Van Dans and the Franks, have been there for 2 months now, and tension is high. Anne and Mr. Van Daan are clashing constantly. She keeps mocking him and talking back to him. Anne's mother is freaking out because Anne's being disrespectful. Tension is high between Anne and Peter. They're not getting along well. Miss Van Daan is calling Anne Peter's little girlfriend. Things are not good. So tension is high. And then on top of all of this, a new person has come to join them in hiding. His name is Mr. Dussel. So today we're going to get to see a little bit about who Mr. Dussel is and what he's like. Reminder that it's not going to come right out and say who Dussel is. We need to pay attention to what he says and what he does to get a good idea for his character. All right, here we go.
All the time, ever since July.
Anne speaks to her father as he comes
So
back.
they're talking to Mr. Dussel.
It worked, Pim. The address you left. Mr. Dussel says that people believe we escaped to Switzerland.
I'm glad. And now, let's have a little drink to welcome Mr. Dussel. Before they can drink, Mr. Dussel bolts his drink. Mr. Frank smiles and raises his glass. To Mr. Dussel, welcome. We're very honored to have you with us.
To Mr. Dussel, welcome.
The Van Daans murmur a welcome. The grown-ups drink.
That was good.
Did Mr. Crowler warn you that you won't get much to eat here? You can imagine 3 ration books among the 7 of us, and now you make 8. Peter walks away, humiliated. Outside, a street organ is heard dimly.
Yeah, it was pretty rude of his dad.
Mr. Van Daan, you don't realize what is happening outside, that you should warn me of a thing like that. You don't realize what's going on. As Mr. Van Daan starts his characteristic pacing, Dussel turns to speak to the others. Right here in Amsterdam, every day, hundreds of Jews disappear. They surround a block and search house by house. Children come home from school to find their parents gone. Hundreds are being deported. People that you and I know. The Hellensteins, the Vessels.
Oh, no. No.
They get their call-up notice. Come to the Jewish theater on such and such a day and hour. Bring only what you can carry in a rucksack. And if you refuse the call-up notice, then they come and drag you from your home and ship you off to Mauthausen, the death camp. And if you refuse the call-up notice, then they come and drag you from your home and ship you off to Mauthausen, the death camp.
Sorry, error there.
We didn't know that things had got so much worse.
Forgive me for speaking so.
Do you know the Duvals? What's become of them? Their daughter Yopi and I are in the same class. Yopi's my best friend.
They are gone
Gone?
with all the others.
Oh, no. Not Yopi.
She turns away in tears. Mrs. Frank motions to Margot to comfort her. Margot goes to Anne, putting her arms comfortingly around her.
There were some people called Wagner. They lived near us?
I think we should put this off until later. We all have many questions we want to ask. But I'm sure that Mr. Dussel would like to get settled before supper.
This is the first time a lot of them are hearing specific news about their friends and neighbors. And a lot of times, while Meep and Mr. Crawler will give people, the families in the annex, information about what's been going on, they don't give them the specifics. They try to keep them in good spirits. So our two families didn't know how bad things were getting outside and how dangerous things were getting. In particular, Anne's losing her friend, not knowing what's happened to her is pretty distressing.
Thank you. I would. I brought very little with me. Giving him his hat and briefcase. I'm sorry we can't give you a room alone, but I hope you won't be too uncomfortable. We've had to make strict rules here, a schedule of hours. We'll tell you after supper. Anne, would you like to take Mr. Dussel to his room?
If you'll come with me, Mr. Dussel.
She starts for her room, shaking hands with each in turn. Forgive me if I haven't really expressed my gratitude to all of you. This has been such a shock to me. I'd always thought of myself as Dutch. I was born in Holland. My father was born in Holland, and my grandfather. And now, after all these years, if you'll excuse me. Dussel gives a little bow and hurries off after An. Mr. Frank and the others are subdued.
They're quiet and serious.
Well, here we are.
Dussel looks around the room. In the main room, Margot speaks to her mother.
The news sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? It's so different from what Mr. Crawler tells us. Mr. Crawler says things are improving.
I like it better the way Crawler tells it. They resume their occupations quietly. Peter goes off into his room. In An's room, An turns to Dussel.
You're going to share the room with me.
I'm a man who's always lived alone. I haven't had to adjust myself to others. I hope you'll bear with me until I learn.
Let me help you.
She takes his briefcase.
Do you always live all alone? Have you no family at all?
No one. He opens his medicine case and spreads his bottles on the dressing table.
How dreadful. You must be terribly lonely.
I'm used to it.
I don't think I could ever get used to it. Didn't you even have a pet? A cat? Or a dog?
I have an allergy for fur-bearing animals. They give me asthma.
Oh dear. Peter has a cat.
Here? He has it here?
Yes, but we hardly ever see it. He keeps it in his room all the time. I'm sure it will be all right.
Let us hope so. He takes some pills to fortify himself.
To strengthen himself.
That's Margot's bed, where you're going to sleep. I sleep on the sofa there.
Indicating the clothes hooks on the wall.
We cleared these off for your things.
She goes over to the window.
The best part about this room, you can look down and see a bit of the street and the canal. There's a houseboat. You can see the end of it. A barge man lives there with his family. They have a baby, and he's just beginning to walk. And I'm so afraid he's going to fall into the canal someday. I watch him.
Your father spoke of a schedule.
Oh, yes. It's mostly about the times we have to be quiet, and the times for the WC. You can use it now if you like.
No, thank you.
Awkward.
I suppose you think it's awful, my talking about a thing like that. But you don't know how important it can get to be, especially when you're frightened. About this room, the way Margot and I did. She had it to herself in the afternoons, for studying, reading, lessons, you know, and I took the mornings. Would that be all right with you?
I'm not at my best in the morning.
You stay here in the mornings, then. I'll take the room in the afternoons.
Tell me, when you're in here, what happens to me? Where am I spending my time? In there with all the people?
Relatable.
Yes,
I see.
we have supper at 6:30.
Then, if you don't mind, I like to lie down quietly for 10 minutes before eating. I find it helps the digestion.
Of course. I hope I'm not going to be too much of a bother to you. I seem to be able to get everyone's back up.
The phrase able to get everyone's back up, imagine like a cat or a dog that you've been bothering and they kind of like scrunch up and their like scruff on the neck kind of like goes up. So basically what Anne's saying is she seems to be able to annoy everybody.
Dussel lies down on the sofa, curled up, his back to her. I always get along very well with children, and my patients all bring their children to me because they know I get on well with them. So don't you worry about that. An leans over him, taking his hand and shaking it gratefully.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dussel.
The lights dim to darkness.
Sorry, I keep pausing. I just want to point something out. Anne just said Margot's bed is where you're sleeping. The sofa is where I sleep. Notice Mr. Dussel just laid down on the sofa with his back to her. He's like, don't worry, I get along well with kids. They always bring their kids with me because I get along so well with kids. So don't worry. We'll see how that goes.
The curtain falls on the scene. Anne's voice comes to us, faintly at first, and then with increasing power.
And yesterday, I finished Sissy von Marxwelt's latest book. I think she is a first-class writer. I shall definitely let my children read her. Monday, the 21st of September, 1942. Mr. Dussel and I had another battle yesterday.
There it is.
Yes, Mr. Dussel. According to him, nothing, I repeat, nothing is right about me. My appearance, my character, my manners. While he was going on at me, I thought, sometime I'll give you such a smack that you'll fly right up to the ceiling.
Woo!
Why is it that every grown-up thinks he knows the way to bring up children? Particularly the grown-ups that never had any. I keep wishing that Peter was a girl instead of a boy. Then I would have someone to talk to. Margot's a darling, but she takes everything too seriously. To pause for a moment on the subject of Mrs. Von Don, I must tell you that her attempts to flirt with Father are getting her nowhere. Pym, thank goodness, won't play.
As she is saying the last lines, the curtain rises on the darkened scene. Anne's voice fades out.
And on we go to scene 4. I want you guys to notice that we are picking up in the middle of the night. This is several months later. So now they've been there for, I think we're getting close to a year. It's been many months that they've been living there now.
Scene 4. It is the middle of the night, several months later. The stage is dark, except for a little light which comes through the skylight in Peter's room. Everyone is in bed. Mr. and Mrs. Frank lie on the couch in the main room, which has been pulled out to serve as a makeshift double bed. Margot is sleeping on a mattress on the floor in the main room, behind a curtain stretched across for privacy. The others are all in their accustomed rooms. From outside, we hear 2 drunken soldiers singing Lily Marlene.
Sorry, I had to pause for a second. All right, we're going to continue.
A girl's high giggle is heard. The sound of running feet is heard coming closer and then fading in the distance. Throughout the scene, there is the distant sound of airplanes passing overhead. A match suddenly flares up in the attic. We dimly see Mr. Van Daan. He is getting his bearings. He comes quickly down the stairs and goes to the cupboard where the food is stored. Again, the match flares up and is as quickly blown out. The dim figure is seen to steal back up the stairs.
Sorry, somebody else at my door. Give me 1 second. All right, continuing.
There is quiet for a second or two, broken only by the sound of airplanes and running feet on the street below.
So Mr. Dussel lit a match. Not Dussel. Mr. Van Daan. Mr. Van Daan. Mr. Van Daan, sorry. Lit a match, went down the stairs, went to where the food was stored in the middle of the night, and went back upstairs. I wonder what he's doing.
Suddenly, out of the silence and the dark, we hear Anne scream.
No, no, don't take me.
She moans, tossing and crying in her sleep. The other people wake, terrified. Dussel sits up in bed, furious. Shush, Anne! Anne, for God's sake, shush!
Save me, save me.
She screams and screams. Dussel gets out of bed, going over to her, trying to wake her. For God's sake, quiet, quiet! You want someone to hear? In the main room, Mrs. Frank grabs a shawl and pulls it around her. She rushes. Mr. Frank hurriedly gets up, putting on his overcoat. Margot sits up, terrified. Peter's light goes on in his room.
Hush, darling, hush. It's all right. It's all right.
Over her shoulder to Dussel.
Will you be kind enough to turn on the light, Mr. Dussel? It's nothing, my darling. It was just a dream.
Dussel turns on the light in the bedroom. Mrs. Frank holds Anne in her arms. Gradually, Anne comes out of her nightmare, still trembling with horror. Mr. Frank comes into the room and goes quickly to the window, looking out to be sure that no one outside had heard Anne's screams. Mrs. Frank holds Anne, talking softly to her. In the main room, Margot stands on a chair, turning on the center hanging lamp. A light goes on in the Van Daan's room overhead. Peter puts his robe on, coming out of his room. Something must be done about that child, Mrs. Frank. Yelling like that. Who knows but there's somebody on the streets. She's endangering all our lives.
Darling.
Every night she twists and turns. I don't sleep. I spend half my night shushing her. And now it's nightmares. Margot comes to the door of Ann's room, followed by Peter. Mr. Frank goes to them, indicating that everything is all right. Peter takes Margot back.
You're here safe. You see? Nothing has happened. Please, Mr. Dussel, go back to bed. She'll be herself in a minute or two. Won't you, Anne?
Picking up a book and a pillow. Thank you, but I'm going to the WC. The one place where there's peace. He stalks out. Mr. Van Daan, in underwear and trousers, comes down the stairs.
So Dussel is not acting too empathetic to Anne's horrible nightmares. I get the feeling that he doesn't really get kids, because he certainly doesn't have empathy for Anne and her nightmares.
What is it? What happened? A nightmare. She was having a nightmare. I thought someone was murdering her. Unfortunately, no.
Dang!
He goes into the bathroom. Mr. Van Daan goes back up the stairs. Mr. Frank, in the main room, sends Peter back to his own bedroom. Thank you, Peter. Go back to bed. Peter goes back to his room. Mr. Frank follows him, turning out the light and looking out the window. Then he goes back to the main room and gets up on a chair, turning out the center hanging lamp.
Would you like some water? Was it a very bad dream? Perhaps if you told me. I'd rather not talk about it. Poor darling. Try to sleep then. I'll sit right here beside you until you fall asleep.
She brings a stool over, sitting there.
You don't have to. But I'd like to stay with you. Very much. Really. I'd rather you didn't. Good night then.
She leans down to kiss Anne. Anne throws her arm up over her face, turning away. Mrs. Frank, hiding her hurt, kisses Anne's arm.
You'll be all right? There's nothing that you want? Will you please ask Father to come? Of course, son dear.
She hurries out into the other room. Mr. Frank comes to her as she comes in.
Sehr verlangt nach dir.
Edith, liebe Schau.
Es mag nicht. Ich danke deinem Leben, Herrgott, dass sie sich wenigstens an dich wendet, wenn die Trost braucht. Geh hinein, Otto. Sie ist ganz ernst.
As Mr. Frank hesitates,
Geh zu ihr.
he looks at her for a second and then goes to get a cup of water for Anne. Mrs. Frank sinks down on the bed, her face in her hands, trying to keep from sobbing aloud. Margot comes over to her, putting her arms around her.
She wants nothing of me. She pulled away when I leaned down to kiss her.
This is actually really interesting. That is quite a bit of German that they're speaking. So most of the time, our main characters speak English. But remember that German is their main language. So if you speak two languages, or if you know somebody that does, think about for what reason and why somebody would slip into speaking that other language. In this case, Mrs. Frank is very stressed and she's very sad. She's feeling a lot of emotion. So she slipped back into that German, which is comfortable for her. In case you're wondering what she's saying, she says when she goes to get Mr. Frank, the first thing she says is she's asking for you. And then Mr. Frank says, dear, look, because she's starting to cry. She tried to stay with Anne, but even when she tried to kiss Anne goodnight, Anne blocked her kiss and put up her arm. And so then Mrs. Frank says, it's all right. I thank dear God that at least she turns to you when she needs comfort. Go in, Otto. She's hysterical with fear. And then she says, go to her. So her feelings are really hurt because Anne basically said, I don't want anything. I don't want anything from you. I just want Dad. So that's hurt her feelings.
It's a phase. You heard Father. Most girls go through it. They turn to their fathers at this age. They give all their love to their fathers. You weren't like this. You didn't shut me out. She'll get over it.
She smooths the bed for Mrs. Frank and sits beside her a moment as Mrs. Frank lies down. In Anne's room, Mr. Frank comes in, sitting down by Anne. Anne flings her arms around him, clinging to him. In the distance, we hear the sound of ack-ack.
Oh, Pim, I dreamed that they came to get us. The Green Police. They broke down the door and grabbed me and started to drag me out the way they did Yopi.
I want you to take this pill,
What is it?
something to quiet you. She takes it and drinks the water. In the main room, Margot turns out the light and goes back to her bed. Do you want me to read to you for a while?
No. Just sit with me for a minute. Was I awful? Did I yell terribly loud? Do you think anyone outside could have heard?
No. Lie quietly now. Try to sleep.
I'm a terrible coward. I'm so disappointed in myself. I think I've conquered my fear. I think I'm really grown up. And then something happens, and I run to you like a baby. I love you, Father. I don't love anyone but you.
Anna.
It's true. I've been thinking about it for a long time. You're the only one I love.
It's fine to hear you tell me that you love me, but I'd be happier if you said you love your mother as well. She needs your help so much. Your love.
We have nothing in common. She doesn't understand me. Whenever I try to explain my views on life to her, she asks me if I'm constipated.
You hurt her very much just now. She's crying. She's in there crying.
I can't help it. I only told the truth. I didn't want her here. Oh, Pim, I was horrible, wasn't I? And the worst of it is, I can stand off and look at myself doing it, and know it's cruel, and yet I can't stop doing it. What's the matter with me? Tell me. Don't say it's just a phase. Help me.
Relatable.
There is so little that we parents can do to help our children. We can only try to set a good example, point the way. The rest you must do yourself. You must build your own character.
I'm trying. Really, I am. Every night I think back over all of the things I did that day that were wrong. Like putting the wet mop in Mr. Doosel's bed. And this thing now with Mother. I say to myself, that was wrong. I make up my mind. I'm never going to do that again. Never. Of course, I may do something worse. But at least I'll never do that again. I have a nicer side, Father. A sweeter, nicer side. But I'm scared to show it. I'm afraid that people are going to laugh at me if I'm serious. So the mean An comes to the outside, and the good An stays on the inside. And I keep on trying to switch them around, and have the good An outside, and the bad An inside. And be what I'd like to be, and might be. If only.
She is asleep. Mr. Frank watches her for a moment, and then turns off the light and starts out. The lights dim out. The curtain falls on the scene. Anne's voice is heard, dimly at first, and then with growing strength.
So this is another diary entry or two that she's reading aloud.
The air raids are getting worse. They come over day and night. The noise is terrifying. Pim says it should be music to our ears. The more planes, the sooner will come the end of the war. Mrs. Von Don pretends to be a fatalist. What will be, will be. But when the planes come over, who's the most frightened? No one else but Petronella.
Mrs. Van Dam.
Monday, the 9th of November, 1942. Wonderful news. The Allies have landed in Africa. Pim says that we can look for an early finish to the war. Just for fun, he asked each of us what was the first thing we wanted to do when we got out of here. Mrs. Von Don longs to be home with her own things. Her needlepoint chairs, the Bechstein piano her father gave her. The best that money could buy. Peter would like to go to a movie. Mr. Doosel wants to get back to his dentist's drill. He's afraid he is losing his touch. For myself, there are so many things. To ride a bike again. To laugh till my belly aches. To have new clothes from the skin out. To have a hot tub filled to overflowing and wallow in it for hours. To be back in school with my friends.
As the last lines are being said, the curtain rises on the scene. The lights dim on as An's voice fades away.
And that's the conclusion to our scene 4. Sorry, that was a short scene. That's the conclusion to scene 4. I'll see you guys. Join y'all for next time. Bye.